for bloodborne pathogen training delivered by Osha Safety Cons.Nig Limited. Looking at exposure control methods as well as what to do when an exposure occurs, and also communicating hazards in a workplace. So let's start by looking at our exposure control methods. Now, basically, there are two essential strategies employers use to eliminate or minimize the transmission of bloodborne diseases, and they are the engineering control and the work practice control. Now, the engineering control is basically talking about the use of equipment or machines to minimize exposure, you understand? Using equipment or machines as a barrier to minimize exposure. For instance, the use of splash guard to prevent against any splash or spill from blood or opium in the course of carrying out your work, understand? And also using a mechanical pipetting control instead of using mouth pipetting, which is very dangerous as well. So basically, the engineering control is talking about how you can use equipment or machines to minimize exposure to these bloodborne diseases. Then the work practice control is basically talking about how you can carry out your task or your work carefully to minimize exposure. You understand? For instance, putting on disposable gloves to perform your task and also carefully taking them off. You understand? Or maybe and also carrying out works that involve splashing and splattering, carrying them out carefully to prevent any form of splashing, you understand? And also how you can carefully handle your materials you use for work, understand? Like your potentially contaminated bandages, your gauze, your sharp needles, basically how you carry out your work carefully to avoid being exposed to any of those bloodborne diseases or pathogens, you understand? So that's basically what the work practice control is talking about, carrying out your work carefully to avoid being exposed, be it handling of materials, be in the process of working, and even taking off gloves and so many other things you need to do carefully to avoid being exposed to any bloodborne pathogen is what the work practice control is basically talking about. Then also we have other methods of controlling exposure like the safe work practices, talking about unsafe work practices that you shouldn't do in your workplace, especially if the workplace is related to dealing with bloods and opium, you understand? So things that you shouldn't do. For instance, you shouldn't be eating or drinking in such a working environment. You understand? You shouldn't be also smoking. Understand? So all those unsafe practices that you shouldn't do around those kind of working condition is what the safe work practice is all about. You understand? Even in some healthcare facilities, the use of makeups or wearing of nails and painting of nails are considered unsafe practices and that should not be done in a work area such as the one we are talking about. So every unsafe practice should not be done in such working environment. So that's what the safe work practice, like I said, is all about. Then also wash your hands. You should always ensure to wash your hands, especially after dealing with contaminated stuff. You understand? Wash your hand with soap and water, or you can, in the absence of soap and running water, you can use sanitizers or maybe warm water to wash your hand to kill off any potential pathogen. You understand? So washing of hand is very, very important. Then finally, it said the prohibited practices. Prohibited practices is talking about things that should never be done in a workplace, especially workplace related to or a workplace that have a tendency of exposing you to bloodborne pathogens. You understand? For instance, you should never share needles. Understand? Never share needles. Never break needles to kind of share. You understand? Or recapping and opening of used and contaminated needles. All those are prohibited practices that should never be done in a workplace related to what the kind of job we are talking about, the healthcare sector, you understand, or jobs that can expose you to blood and opiums. And even using your mouth to pipette is also a practice that should not be done in a working environment such as the one we are talking about, which is probably the healthcare sector, you understand. And now here is a case study to round up that chapter. It says Dr. Kramer owns and operates a small dental clinic in San Francisco, CA. As part of her exposure control plan, she requires her employees to wash their hands before and after working with any patient. She also requires new gloves to be used for every patient. Question is this an example of engineering control or work practice control? Then we move on to hepatitis B virus immunization. Like we said, the best way to prevent hepatitis B is by getting vaccinated, you understand? And also employers are expected to provide this vaccine for employees who are at risk of being exposed to blood or opium, and they are expected to give them for free. You understand? They expect the employers to give this vaccination to the employees for free. Then the shots, the hepatitis B require three separate injections to ensure or provide full immunity. And so the vaccination schedule. The first injection can be administered at any time, so you can take it at any time. Then the second one should be given at least 1 month after the first injection has been taken. And then the third and final injection should be given 6 months after the first injection. And now here is also a case study to round up that hepatitis B vaccination or chapter. Say Tony has just been accepted to a local paramedic training program. Before beginning the program, the school requires students to receive the hepatitis B vaccination and pay for it themselves. The question is the school required to pay for the vaccination? And what are your reasons? So we move on to the next chapter. It says when an explosion occurs, what to do when an explosion occurs. So what to do when an explosion occurs? When an explosion occurs, the first thing to do is to wash off immediately. And immediate self-care is required. So wash off the contaminated material from either the mucus of the eye, the nose, or the mouth with large amount of water. But wherever the materials come in contact with, especially the nose, eyes, and mouth, wash it with large amount of water immediately. That is the first thing you should do before taking any other step. Then also, if maybe you are punctured by a needle, understand, or a sharp object, what you should do is allow that punctured injury to bleed. Allow it to bleed. When you allow it to bleed, there is tendency that the pathogens that may be contained in that contaminated material will also bleed off if you allow it to bleed, you understand? And then also you wash with soap and water, you understand? Then also, when potentially contaminated material, wash potentially contaminated material off your skin with soap and water, especially when you have rash, cut, or scrapes on your skin. Use soap and water to wash thoroughly. Now, what you do next immediately after administering your self-care, which is the washing and all that, is to report the exposure incident without delay to the supervisor or whoever is in charge. And immediately a medical evaluation should be taken to know where you were, how you were exposed, when you were exposed, and so many other things and they need to know, you understand? And then also, if it is a HIV blood, infected blood, then there will be what they call a post-exposure therapy, which will include uh, prophylaxis, which talking about immediate treatment. Immediate treatment, you understand, where you can take, so there are certain drugs you will take immediately you get exposed to an HIV-infected blood, and it will reduce the chances of you getting infected a lot. If you are exposed to HIV-infected blood, if you start your treatment, it's talking about the prophylaxis, if you start your treatment quickly and early enough, it may save you from being infected from the HIV virus. Understand? So if it's a case of HIV infected blood, immediately a prophylaxis should occur. Then after that, there should be an evaluation and counseling and education regarding the testing process and ramification of exposure, you understand. After that, you test the patient, you understand. You do your evaluation and testing of the patient and all that. So while the test is ongoing, it's very important that you also counsel the patient, you understand, make them understand the ramification of exposure, the tendency of them being infected, and also make them understand that the fact that they're being infected does not mean the end of the world, and they can live a normal life and also be happy, and basically just give them encouragement and everything, and also let them understand that there is also a chance of the result coming out negative, you understand. So basically you do your evaluation and you counsel them before the test result will finally come out. And when result comes out, it should be confidential. It should be between the company and the patient alone. No other body aside the whoever is in charge of that or aspects of the company and the patient should be confidential. You understand? The next is housekeeping. It said housekeeping refers to ensuring a work site is maintained and clean in a sanitary condition. So basically, housekeeping is talking about keeping your work site clean. You understand? And there should be a routine or schedule on how to clean and decontaminate the location or the work site. Understand? So you said there are four regulated ways and that require special handling. So one is liquid or semi-liquid blood or potentially infectious materials. You should handle such materials with great care. You understand? Handle with great care, and any of such material that is seen around the working facilities should what be immediately decontaminated, you understand, and properly cleaned and sanitized. Then also contaminated items that could release potentially infectious materials in liquid or semi-liquid state. You understand? Any contaminated item should be disposed properly and kept off the environment, properly decontaminated and kept off the environment and disposed. You understand? Then also say item cakes, talking about solid or dried items with potentially infectious materials that are capable of releasing these materials during handling. All such materials should be properly decontaminated. You understand? Decontaminate them properly, and those that ought to be disposed should also be disposed properly, and the entire work site should be made clean and serene, you understand. Then contaminated sharp objects, those that need to be sharp objects that are contaminated should be properly disposed of the work site, you understand, to avoid any other person ignorantly coming in contact with them. So basically housekeeping is keeping your work site clean, you understand. The next, it says potentially biohazard waste. So it is of utmost importance that infectious waste be carefully or be safely contained. You understand? Any waste that have the potential to cause any form of infection should be safely contained. Like infectious waste should be placed in special designed container constructed to contain the content. You understand? That's to say you should have a container where you can keep all your waste infectious and waste products. You understand? Place them in a special container. The container also should be leak proof. You understand? Should be prevented from leaking. Should also be labeled or color coded. Understand? That is to say, you should ensure that there is a label on it showing that this is a container that contains contaminated stuff. Understand? Or you use a color, you can use red or to indicate danger or whatever. You understand? So you should ensure that the container that carries those potentially infectious waste product should be well labeled for people to see and easily understand. Then also close prior to removal to prevent spill. When you want to carry those containers, ensure they are properly closed to prevent them from spilling or coming in contact with you, understand? And if container is leaking, place on a secondary leak proof, understand? If the container is leaking, place it in another container that is not leaking to avoid coming in contact with the potentially waste infectious materials that are in the container. So next we'll be talking about communicating hazard in a workplace, using communicating with the signs and the labels, information training, training program element, frequency of training and case studies. So those are what we'll be talking about in the course of this chapter. So we start with our signs and labels. Now signs and labels should be used as an alert on potentially infectious materials to reduce or prevent the risk of being exposed, you understand? And also be sure to be aware of and abide by all signs and labels signaling hazards of hazardous material. Be aware of the various signs and to know the various signs that you can use to know the various kind of hazards that are contained in a container or to identify particular hazardous material. Be aware of the various signs that are used to indicate different kind of hazards, you understand, and also ensure to abide by them. They say signs should have fluorescent orange on orange-red background with a black biohazard symbol in the foreground. As I use a fluorescent, by using a fluorescent orange or orange-red symbol with orange red with the background of a biohazard symbol, the 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 orange fluorescent stuff reflects, you understand? So it makes it easy to see, understand? And you should always carry that biohazard symbol on it. By that fluorescence orange, it makes it to reflect and easy to see, understand? You easily see the biohazard symbol on it through that reflection. I say labels must contain biohazard symbol and must have the biohazard reading within them. The label should always have that biohazard symbol, understand, and also uh, the biohazard symbol should also be written on them. The biohazard symbol is something like three circles drawn together, understand, should always be placed on the body of the container, understand. Then I said a biohazard label or sign should be attached each object or container of contaminated material by strings, wire, adhesive, or another method that prevent loss or unintentional removal of the label or sign. You know, it should be attached by any form of adhesive, either by wire or whatever, to prevent any form of unintentional removal of the sign. You understand? Then it says also when red bags or container with biohazard symbol on them are used, a sign or label is not necessary. Red bags already indicate danger. You understand? So these are some of the things the workers and everybody associated with the work should be aware of. That red containers indicates danger. You understand? So in such cases, the biohazard symbol are no longer necessary. You understand? The signs and labels are no longer necessary. They say also when medical laboratory personnel are drawing and testing blood, the individual container housing the potentially infectious material do not need to be labeled, which means the ones you are using immediately there. You take your needle, you do what you want to do, you put them, after you are done, you put it in the container, the waste container by your side. That container that you put your waste material does no longer need labeling. Why? Because you are making use of it at that moment. So you should know the one that is for contaminated and one that is not for contaminated materials. You understand? Then also you say properly indicating contaminated materials using signs and label will greatly reduce risk of exposure to accident, exposure to contaminated materials as well. So when you use the signs and labels, it reduces the risk of being exposed. So next is information and training. He said all employers, including part-time and the temporary workers should all undergo the training, should all participate in the training. As long as you have the risk of being exposed, you should undergo this training, whether you're a part-time worker or a temporary worker, you understand? So the training materials should be appropriate in content and vocabulary to the education and literacy level and are conveyed in the language of the employees. You understand? The material should be relevant to the training that you want to give. You understand? The materials for that training should be relevant to what you want them to achieve, and you should also convey whatever training you are carrying out in a language the employees they will understand. If you use a language they do not understand, they may end up being exposed because they did not get the instructions that you give. So always ensure that your training breaks down every single details, understand, to even the language that the employees will understand. If there is in the course of your training, there's an individual among them, maybe you are using English for the training, and there is an individual among them that is not too good in English. If you have a way of explaining to that individual in a language and a way he will understand, go that far to ensure everybody is carried along and everybody understands the training and all that is all about. As a training material should clearly state the objective of the training. The objective of the training should be stated even from the beginning of the training. The trainer should be knowledgeable about the subject as covered by the training program as it relates to the workplace, as well as it should be an interactive training section as well. Then it says the training program elements. So the bloodborne pathogen program should include information and explanation of at least the following: the epidemiology, the symptom and modes of transmission of bloodborne diseases, which is all we have been talking about since the beginning of the training. Then also an exposure control plan that has been implemented and how it can be obtained. The exposure control plan of the company, you understand, and how the employees can have a copy of those exposure control plan to help guide them in their work process. Then also the appropriate method for recognizing tasks and activities that may involve exposure to blood or opium. Understand how to know the jobs that are associated with blood and opium. They should all be made recognizable, easy to recognize, and everyone should know, every employer should know that the task he or she is going to get involved in may involve possible exposure, you understand? So the employer should be made to recognize the dangers associated with their work, you understand? There's a use of methods that prevent or reduce exposure, including appropriate engineering, administrative or workplace control, and personal protective equipment, information, and training. All these various methods to reduce exposure should also be made known or put into practice as well. Then also it says the basis for selection of PPE, the types of PPE that should be used for a particular kind of job, the proper usage, how to use it, the location remover, how to remove PPEs properly, handling of decontaminated and disposal of PPE that should be disposed or those that should be decontaminated. Then also the hepatitis B series, including its efficacy, should be made known, safety and method of administration should all be made known as well. The benefit and the fact that the benefits and the fact that it will be given to employee free of charge are all the things that are made to be should be able to be made to be known and appropriate action to take and persons to contact in an emergency involving blood or opium. All these are some of the things that the training should involve as well. Then also the procedures to follow if an explosion incident occur should also be outlined. Said the method of reporting the incident. If an incident occur, how should the employee go about it? How should he go in reporting? Who are the persons that he should be reporting to? All this should also be made known as well. The medical follow-up that will be made available. Also, the medical follow-up that will be made available if there is an incident, you understand? The medical follow-up, the evaluation, the prophylaxis, and all that that will be following up, you understand, should all be made known as well. Should be all be component of the training process. Then procedures for recording the incident in the sharp and injury logbooks. So then post-exposure evaluation and follow-up that will be made available to employees. Post-exposure, after you've been exposed, the various tests that will be done, if possible, prophylaxis and all the counseling and everything that should follow. Then size and label or color coding used. Also, all the signs and all the various signs and the various label that represent various types of hazard that will be used in the course of the work practice or in the working environment should be made known to all the employees so they can easily recognize them when they see them as well. The next is the frequency of training. So training should be provided at times of employees' initial assignment and at least annually after that. So when you are employing them, you should train them and also annually, that's yearly, they should also be trained. Then additional training limited to addressing new exposure created is provided to employees whose occupational exposure is affected by introduction of new engineering, administrative or work practice, changes or modification in existing task or procedure, and institute of new task or procedures. If, for instance, someone who is working, there is a need for a change, understand? Or maybe the aspect where is working has some new changes or modification that occur. They should also make, it should also include those in a new training, include those in their training as well. For instance, if there is a new engineering method or absolute work practice that can be used to tackle the potential exposure better, understand? We also carry out training for such persons in that area. Then also if there is a change or modification in existing task or procedure, understand? If there is a change to the work they were doing, understand? They should also bring up the new measures till the exposure that will be associated with the new job they had to do. Then if there is the institution of new task or procedures, if institute like Osha, EPA, and the rest of them brings up new procedures or new ways of doing things or new laws, they should also train them in applying those laws in the course of their job as well. Then finally, a case study to round up the training. He said Jennifer works for a computer parts manufacturer. One of her job duties is to perform housekeeping tasks for her section of the warehouse. During her last shift, an employee was injured and required first aid treatment, producing contaminated clothing and PPE. The contaminated materials need to be labeled and disposed of. Question: how should Jennifer dispose of these materials? So that's the question to round up this bloodborne pathogen training. So thanks for your time and God bless you. I hope you enjoyed the training process and you've learned something new. Thank you very much.